Hallie, is that you?
You found my old binoculars. I've been looking for these. I don't need my binoculars to see all these beautiful hats. There are some stylish women in Etna. You'll have to forgive me my appearance. I rode my horse down the mountain to get here. I was afraid this might be a high-class affair where I should have taken more care with my appearance. But I've always thought that one's costumes should match one's activity. And riding a horse down a mountain didn't seem quite appropriate for anything except this, so I hope you'll excuse me. Now, I do like to dress up when I have a chance. In fact, visitors to Eddy Gulch up there to the lookout are often surprised to find me in a nice wool skirt and a shirt waist or a lovely blouse. Or maybe it's not the skirt and blouse that surprise them. Maybe it's just me. I seem to have surprised a lot of people in my lifetime, not only in the Forest Service, but in the general public. I was hired as a United States Forest Service fire guard in 1913. And to tell you the truth, the only thing that surprises me is that it took them so long to do it. I was raised in these mountains. My father came here in 1852 looking for gold, and he found it. He owned the Black Bear mine. My mother Alice met and married him in Sawyers bar. My brother Ben was born here, my sister Leslie was born here, and I was born here. We were raised to hunt, fish, shoot, and ride at a very early age. And we explored every mile of the Salmon River drainage while we were growing up. But I wouldn't want you to think that I was some kind of heathen who didn't know how to behave in civilized company. Far from it. You see, as Sawyers mentioned, my father became lieutenant governor after he was elected to the state legislature. And he went on to be supervisor of the U.S. Mint. So I guess he never lost his love of gold, come to think of it. During those years, my sister Leslie and I attended prestigious girls' academies in San Francisco. Sawyers, could you bring me some water? That trail dust has just gotten to me. And we became quite the refined young women. But my heart was always in my childhood home. So I applied to be a fire lookout. I had plenty of experience with fires. Growing up in these mountains, I remember summer days that seemed endless with smoke. And if a fire happened to be threatening someone's home, they would send out a crew. And in those days, fighting those fires was a man's fight, and strictly a man's fight. But my sister and I helped every way we could. We'd take supplies out to the men. We would help put out campfires that had started to spread. But I wanted to do more. I loved these mountains. I loved this forest. So I applied to be a fire guard. I got my big break in 1913. My luck changed. For several circumstances, not the least of which was that I had been pestering the Forest Service for years. I was lucky in that the assistant fire chief that year was a man named Mr. McCarthy, who was quite liberal. And Mr. McCarthy was faced with something of a crisis in 1913. You see, in May, right before the fire season was going to start, the lookout that was scheduled quit because he found a higher paying job. And the only other two applicants besides myself were unfit. One of them had poor eyesight. The other one was a crack shot. But as Mr. McCarthy said, he got most of his target practice shooting holes in the Fish and Game laws. So he wrote to the district ranger about me. But he was very circumspect in his letter. He praised my qualities, said I had all the requisites of a fine lookout. I was a crack shot. I was unafraid of anything that walked, crawled, or flew. I was untiring, enthusiastic, although he did warn them that I was no gentleman. And then he added, I hope your heart can take the shock. The exemplary candidate I speak of is Miss Hallie Daggett. I was determined to do my duties faithfully. I knew if I had any hope of being hired for the 1914 fire season, I had to do my job with all the skill of a trained man. But I was not terribly worried. And indeed, I performed my duties. There were men, I found out, that had been laying bets on how many days I would last before I called on that phone and said that the loneliness and the danger were too much for me. After the first big electrical storm, they sent a man up to come and find me, expecting me, I suppose, to be hiding under a log or under the cabin. And instead, I'd had more fun. I enjoyed that storm, even though the telephone wires went down during it and were out for several weeks after that. I loved my job, every bit of it. All I wanted was to work in my beloved forest. But oh dear, did my job cause a fuss. I had reporters contacting me, wanting interviews. They did stories about me. It seemed every newspaper was interested in this new woman fire warden. One headline assured its readers, though, that even though Miss Hallie Daggett was the first female fire warden, she was actually quite feminine. I wonder what they'd think if they could see me at this moment. And it wasn't just newspapers and magazines that were interested. I was asked to speak to civic groups and ladies' clubs. That's what I did a lot when fire season was over. I was a very sought-after speaker. I even had a Hollywood movie producer contact me. And it seems interest has never really died. People still want to know what my life is like up on my lookout. And I tell them, well, there's a certain amount of housework. Even at the top of a mountain, you can't seem to escape that. I have my daily routines. I have to gather wood and water every day. Fortunately, the wood is plentiful as long as you know how to use an axe. And water, I'm lucky too. Only about a mile from the cabin, there's a spring. And for half the fire season, there's a water source closer than that. Because until the end of July, I'm surrounded by snowbanks. Although it is odd to go for water with a bucket and a shovel. I also have to report in 3 times a day on the telephone to tell them that I'm all right. More often if I've spotted a fire. That first season, I spotted 40 fires and kept the total damage to less than 5 acres.
Wow.
Besides gathering wood and water and doing my laundry and keeping my cabin free of cobwebs, I also have to raise and lower the American flag every morning and every evening, a ritual I take seriously. Every morning when I raise that flag above my cabin, I stand there and gaze at it, and I get a thrill of pride that never goes away. I love my country. I love the feeling of doing something for my country. But besides my little daily rituals, my major duty is to scan the neighborhood for fires, both with my naked eye and with my binoculars. I even have a telescope to look out beyond that. During the day, I am always looking for any puff of smoke that might indicate a fire. And every night, I look for a tiny red spark, little glare that would indicate a fire. I'm on duty 24 hours a day, and I'm on constant alert. There's some time for reading. Sometimes I play solitaire, but I must always be on alert for Now, in all the interviews that people have asked me to do, the questions that come up all the time is, aren't you lonely? Aren't you frightened up there? And I say, frightened? What am I supposed to be frightened of? The electrical storms? I told you, I think they're simply grand, other than their ability to generate fires. But if you have never seen a display of God's lightning and thunder from the top of a mountain peak, you have missed out. I've never been afraid of them, never been hit by lightning. I've always enjoyed them. And as for animals, my first season I killed 1 bear, 3 coyotes, and 4 wildcats. And the smaller creatures, oh, they're my friends. At this moment, I have deer that come around the cabin every evening. Birds of every kind come to my door to be fed. I have 7 pet chipmunks that eat out of my hands. There's a little brown bear down by the spring. And I have 2 porcupines who have made it their mission every single night to find a way into my cabin. And as for being lonely, well, I have the phone to occupy me. And every week, my sister Leslie comes up and brings me supplies and mail. And besides that, I have visitors. There are so many prospectors and hunters and campers who stop by. I have learned to keep the kettle boiling and my teacups clean. So no, I've never been lonely, never been frightened. The only time I am ever filled with dread is with the end of fire season. When I have to give up my precious mountain home and go back to the prison of civilization. And I fear that the end of fire season has come. Not just this fire season, but all of them. I have loved every moment of this job. I have loved doing something for my country. I've loved my cabin, as comfortable as you could wish and with the finest view in the world. I look east to magnificent Mount Shasta, and on a good day, when I look west, I get a glimpse of the Pacific. But it's time for a change, I think. It's 1927. A lot of things have been changing. A lot of things have changed. Oh, the technology that we have. The new maps, new instruments that help me pinpoint the exact position where I see smoke. There's talk of using biplanes to patrol the forest. I'm also not the only woman anymore. During the Great War, the Forest Service literally ran out of manpower and had to start hiring more females, and they've stayed. And last year, there was another change. They built a new lookout up on Eddy Gulch. I don't have my cabin anymore. I've got a very modern, very efficient, elevated cabin, 14 feet by 14 feet, and all 4 walls are glass, with a catwalk running all the way around. The view from through that glass is even more spectacular. But it's just not me. I miss my cabin. So I think I've decided to retire. I plan to stay in these mountains, though. I plan to build myself a new cabin. I plan to put up a flagpole and raise and lower the American flag every morning and every evening. And I plan to keep doing everything I can to protect and conserve this great forest. That's one thing that will never change.